Hey everyone, my name is Scott Blinn, and welcome to episode 5 of my weekly vlog, Type 2 Tuesday. This week I'll be answering a multi-part question about counting carbs as a diabetic on a ketogenic diet. I'll let you know what my own strategy is, and hopefully give you some useful information to help you decide what might be right for you, and maybe even just how to count carbs in the first place. First though, let's dive right into my weekly update. Last week I talked a bit about my recent weight gain over the past month and dove deep into what my current theory was. If you missed that one and are interested into the deep dive that I did on calories, you can catch that here. So how did trying to eat more calories go? Did I gain even more weight this week? Well, let's take a look.
Wow, it's September already. I'm sure many of you are just as eager to get 2020 behind you as I am though. This week my morning blood sugar average was around 120. That's a bit higher than last week and a bit above my normal average these days, but I did eat late a couple of nights last week and that may have been the reason. My daily average was a 113 and I'm happy with that. Now on to my waist. Unlike the slight increase I had last week, I had no change at all this week, so at least I don't need to worry about continuing in the wrong direction. Now on to my weight. Did I gain? Drumroll please. No. In fact, I actually lost 1.6 pounds over the week, which was great. As a reminder from last week's video, I've been stalled and had actually gained a few pounds over the last month. My current idea was that I may have not been eating enough and stalled my metabolism. So was it maybe not getting enough calories in? Let's take a look at how my eating was in the last week. So over the past 7 days, my daily average calorie intake was only slightly better than the average from last month that I discussed in the last video. As I predicted, I found it hard to try to eat more than I already was, but later in the week I did better. If I take the average of just the last 4 days of the week, you can see that it increased to almost 2,000 calories per day, which is about 320 calories more than my past month's average. I also wanted to mention that I did no full day fast last week as another way to up my calorie intake overall. I don't know if this was also a factor in my weight loss, but I'm also not going to be doing any full day fast this week as well, and see how it goes. Of course, this doesn't mean that I've solved my weight gain mystery, but I'll keep doing what I'm doing and we'll see what happens over the next week. So stay tuned for that.
Now let's dive into this week's questions from viewers. This week I'm actually only answering one multi-part question. In my defense though, there's a lot to this one, and I figured that spending more time on the topic diving into the weeds would be a bit more helpful for those who might be frustrated or confused about counting carbs. Today's question has 3 parts. As a diabetic on keto, what is the best way to count carbs? Do you count net carbs or whole carbs and why? And how do you keep track of things every day? First, let's take a step back for those who might not know about carb counting and the various methods you can do. Using the food's nutritional label, there's actually 2 primary ways of counting carbs and a third lesser known method that diabetics might be interested in. The first method is total carbs, which just means to count all the carbs contained in a serving of food. This is very simple to do as you just need to look for the big bold number at the top of the carbohydrate section on the nutritional label. The second method is called net carbs. When calculating net carbs, you subtract the fiber and sugar alcohols in the carbohydrate section of the label, and you're just left with the carbohydrates that, in theory, could actually impact your blood sugar levels. Because of this, many people on keto, even many diabetics, tend to use the net carb method. The third less known method is usually called adjusted net carbs or diabetic net carbs. In this method, you count carbs just like you would with net carbs, but you also add in back half of the sugar alcohols. The reason behind this is that you can still have a glycemic response to some artificial sugars that can raise some people's blood glucose levels. Also, some sugar alcohols can also rise your insulin level, even if your blood sugars are not affected. This can matter if you're looking to actually reverse your type 2 diabetes and become more insulin sensitive again. Keeping insulin levels as low as possible each day is important. If you're interested in how and why the body will react this way to some artificial sweeteners, you should research something called the cephalic phase insulin response. The research here is fairly new, and more human studies need to be done, but is worth keeping in mind as insulin control is really important to type 2 diabetics. So to recap, Let's take a look at a nutritional label and break down each of the methods mentioned to calculate the carbs in a serving of food. In our example food, you can see that the total carbohydrates is 17 grams for a serving size of 2 cookies. Something you might notice, however, is that the fiber, sugar, and sugar alcohols don't actually add up to 17 grams. There can be a few reasons for this, but one of the more common ones is that the numbers are rounded. And where possible, food companies will round them down to make them appear a bit healthier than they may actually be. They also do this trick when it comes to the serving size to make something that is a normal person may eat a lot of seem healthier by reducing the portion size and then dropping the decimals and rounding down there as well. Again, hiding the totals. To use this label as an example, if you instead had 4 cookies, the total carbs may not actually end up being 34 grams, but closer to 36 grams, because the per serving rounded down, as well as the portion size being smaller, kind of hides away a couple carbs. So always be aware of hidden carbs in your foods. Anyway, let's just focus on the carbohydrate section of the label and run the numbers. As I already mentioned, calculating the total carbs is easy. You just take the big number at the top of the carbohydrate section and you're done. To calculate the net carbs, you would subtract the fiber and sugar alcohols from the total. So that means 17 grams minus 11 gives you 6 grams of net carbs per serving. Lastly, to calculate adjusted or diabetic net carbs, you would only subtract half of the sugar alcohols out. So that would mean 2 for the sugar and 4 grams from the sugar alcohols, giving you 6 grams total. You then subtract that number from the total and you get 11 grams adjusted net carbs. Hopefully this example helps give you a better understanding of carb counting. So as far as what is the best way to count carbs, I really think it depends on what you eat and what your goals are. If you're looking for a way to keep yourself strict and your daily carb limit as low as possible, then maybe do total carbs if you want. If you're like me and eat fairly clean keto and mostly natural whole foods without added artificial sweeteners and other hidden carbs, then using the simple net carbs method should be just fine. If you tend to eat more processed or artificial sweetened foods or just have trouble keeping your blood sugar levels in the normal range, then maybe try adjusted net carbs and see if that helps you. Everyone's body is different and responds differently, so do your research and find out what works best for you. Now on to what I personally do when it comes to carb counting. I use the standard net carb method and stick to under 20 grams of net carbs per day. I chose this method for several reasons. The first is simply that when I was researching keto, that is what was recommended, and so that's what I started using. I personally had great success using net carbs, and so I didn't feel the need to change from using that method, and I still use it today. Secondly, as I mentioned, I tend to eat pretty clean keto and stick mostly to natural foods that don't contain sugar alcohols. If I eat more processed keto-friendly foods, then maybe I would notice an issue and slower progress, but I don't, so net carbs has been just fine for me. I should mention that I did try the adjusted net carbs method for a couple weeks, but I saw no real change in the blood sugar numbers for me, so I ended up going back to just regular net carbs because it was easier to count. Again though, that's probably just because I don't tend to eat artificially sweetened or processed foods. Okay, and lastly, what do I use to count carbs? Since the day I started a ketogenic diet, I've been using the Carb Manager food tracking app. I measure and log everything I eat into Carb Manager and find it has been a very useful and powerful tool for me. It's a big part of my success actually. I've tried other food tracking apps early on when I first went low carb, but I found Carb Manager to be the best for me, in part because of its options for counting carbs. As you can see here, you have the option to have it count total carbs, net carbs, or adjusted net carbs. You can also specify the overall type of diet plan you're using and set a daily max carb limit, which is 20 grams here in my case. If you're looking for a good food tracker that works well for diabetics and carb counting on a ketogenic diet, you should definitely give it a try. I'll put a link in the description below if you're interested in checking it out. By the way, this video is not in any way sponsored by Carb Manager. I'm just a fan who's used it for over 9 months daily and has had really good success with it. Anyway, I hope this was helpful, and for those of you that do count carbs, I'd love to know what you prefer. And if you don't count carbs, what's the reason for it? Let me know in the comments below. Well, that's going to wrap up this week's update. Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying these updates, please also consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet. And thanks to those who have. I hope everybody has a great start to this September, and I'll see you all next week.